Like and follow if you love horror. Well, Joan, I'm looking for a place to spend the night, and I don't got shit to my name, Dustin said with a sad sort of shrug. Fuck's sake. Do you seriously have nowhere to fucking go? You are fucking up what was mounting to be a pretty good night. Joan stood up and pinched her eyes. Shit. You can sleep on the floor, you can have one fucking pillow, and if you touch my shit, I'll break every goddamn bone in your body. Deal. Just don't tell no one you seen me, okay? Dustin whimpered, clearly making more than a simple request. Jesus, kid, who are you really running from? The fucking mob? Joan placed her hand at the edge of the sink and sighed heavily. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Dustin stammered as he spoke. Before Joan could respond, a knock came at the door. Dustin dropped the bottle of Jim Beam, but Joan reached out to snag it. The knock came again. Dustin began to tremor in terror and looked about frantically. He saw the bunker slit that was supposed to be a window and began sizing it up. Wait here and don't try anything stupid. You won't fit through the window and you'll tear open what barely constitutes a stitching. Joan grabbed Dustin by the jaw and pointed in his face for emphasis. The knock came again, and as it did, Joan slid up to her coat, hanging in the closet, and retrieved a can of bear mace. The knock came again. It was increasing in frequency and repetition. Joan moved in on the door. She slid the chain lock over the bolt. She knew they were useless, but it was more of a distraction. The real kicker was the mace, effective on half-ton grizzlies that could turn the biggest, hardest thug into a crying preschooler. Joan pulled her meek face and opened the door just a crack. She was met by a pale face, blue eyes, and awkwardly stiff smile. The man looked down at her through the crack, meaning he was pushing 6 and change in height, and Joan could tell by his build that he was pushing 250 at least. Is everything all right? I saw the blood on your door. I was worried someone might be injured. His voice was calm, even, and lacked any hint of tone. Even stranger, his mouth was so damn stiff, like his skin was stretched tight over his face. Oh, I just cut my hand. I know some first aid. It's really no big deal. Joan knew that he could clearly see the dried blood on her hand and decided not to hide it. You cut your hand in the parking lot. The fellow looked back. It could hardly be registered as a question. His voice just lacked any inflection. There seems to be quite a trail of blood. Do you need me to call a paramedic? No, I'm fine. You're very kind, but I'm fine. She smiled sweetly. I heard there was a scream, like someone crying out. He turned back to Joan. A young man? Joan popped the lock on the bear mace with her thumb. There was only one direction this was heading. I did hear that, but by the time I had a chance to look, there was no one there. Sorry I couldn't be much help. She tried to close the door, but it did not yield in the slightest, like it was fixed in concrete. This guy was strong. Do you mind? I have a vibrating bed to get back to. The bed hummed in the background. I do, actually, the stranger replied. There was a force so strong and so sudden, Joan was unsure what hit her. It was like the door was propelled open by a Mack truck. As she was flung backwards, her only concern was retaining the bear mace. With what training she could recover under the extreme and extraordinary force, she braced for impact on the floor. On contact, Joan had the wind taken out of her, but she recovered quickly. All she had to do was point and squeeze. A stream of pepper spray filled the doorway. The stranger at the door stopped dead in his tracks and wiped his face. Sorry about that. That was my repair guy. Alright, where the hell were we? The stranger at the door stopped dead in his tracks and wiped his face. That is quite unpleasant. He made an odd, gripping gesture into the air around him, searching for the doorframe. He posted himself there and practically filled it with his presence. This is so needless. I can already sense the desire in you to abandon the lad. You want no part of this. I can sense your doubt. Joan scrambled backwards on her backside, then hopped to her feet. She motioned for Dustin in the bathroom. Dustin looked like he might piss himself. He gasped deeply for air, but managed to stay quiet and make eye contact with Joan. He nodded subtly. This isn't you. I can sense it. You're not the type to take some chance on some puppy-eyed streetwalker, especially those like Dustin. You know his type, out for the quick fix, the users of the world. He's not worth risking your life. He'd gladly throw you away to save his own skin, and you know it. There was no passion in the stranger's voice, but what he said seemed to connect deeply with Joan. Joan slid over to the wall. The stranger blinked continuously, wiping at his face and rolling his eyes about. Clearly the bear mace had worked, but not in an obvious way. Worried that she might need something a little heavier, she slowly slipped her car keys and wallet out of her coat pocket from the closet. She gathered up some coat hangers and proceeded closer to the stranger. Come now. You're not really thinking about saving him, are you? I know you don't want to. It's only from a false sense of duty that you deny yourself. I tell you what, rather than trying to think of a way to escape, walk towards the back of the room, face away from the door. Don't look back. I'll take him off your hands and you can go back to your vibrating bed. I'll even slip a little extra with the night clerk to forget about the blood and broken lock. Call it a do-over. I can just make it go away. The stranger's offer nagged at Joan. She felt herself desperately wanting to give in. His request, as asinine as it was, began to sound reasonable. Joan threw the coat hangers across the room, aiming for the nightstand. They toppled over her glass and bottle of cheap wine. The stranger leapt so quickly in that direction, Joan could have been convinced he was flying. Without a word spoken, or so much as eye contact between them, Dustin and Joan tore out the door. The stranger fumbled around, knowing he'd fallen for an easy ruse, but seemed to quickly collect himself. He felt around in the air. Joan, you can leave him. You don't have to be a hero, Joan. That's for suckers, is it not? Joan? The stranger raised his voice for the first time. There was a deep scratching in it, and yet it sounded without tone or passion. Dustin followed so closely behind Joan that he was practically piggybacking. She did not go for her driver's side door. Instead, she went for her trunk. Joan was not the kind of woman to fumble with keys, and in moments had the trunk popped, the car door unlocked, and the engine purring with a swift motion of her fob. She flipped up the covers of her tire bed, reached in, and produced a Colt King Cobra, the classic fearbringer. She spun around. As she spun around, the stranger made it to the door of the motel room and was feeling about to get his bearings. The Cobra jerked up with a thunderous clap of gunfire. The stranger flinched lightly as the shot connected with his chest, like he'd been shot by a paintball gun. What the Joan squeezed the trigger again. No less than a headshot would do this time. The stranger's head jerked back, then he fell backwards into the room. Get in the fucking car! Dustin cried out from the back seat. Joan scanned the second-floor walkways of the motel. Lights were coming on all around her. 2 shots from a Colt King Cobra were undeniably gunplay. She slid into the driver's seat, and with the squealing of tires, they peeled away. Chapter 2, Waffle House. Joan stared at Dustin silently. Her face was mostly expressionless, a slight frown if nothing else. Dustin looked up every few minutes, only to dodge his eyes back down again. But he would look up again, and there she was, just staring. You're freaking me out, man, Dustin said, digging into a bite of his sausage and waffles. What kind of fucking dust are you into? Did you steal something from those people? Joan asked, her expression unchanged. Are you fucking kidding me? What? Did you just black out the whole last hour? Look, I'm not a gun expert, but let me swing a guess at something. That hand cannon should have blown that guy wide open and knocked him back 5 feet. Am I just about on point? Dustin leaned forward, and though he was keeping his voice low, was clearly a little frantic. So he was wearing armor. I caught him in the head, and that's that. Mind you, I'm going to have to report this as soon as there are cops on the scene. Joan replied, waving off the thought. No way. You're not fooling me.